Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Not Your College Life with Lisa Beals, episode number 56. I'm your host, Lisa Beals, that Midwestern mom slash college administrator who's done the college thing myself and realized that universities and administrators don't make it easy on parents or students. We create so much bureaucracy and red tape, and I am here to bridge that gap for you so that you can coach your student and find the answers that you both need so you can move on to empty nester syndrome. I believe college classes should be hard, not navigating the higher ed system. So, in this week's episode, I have my special guest back, Joy Alford-Brand, the attorney, who has graciously agreed to dig in a little bit deeper on some topics, on some of the topics that I've seen conversation about. We're talking about FAFSA revision. We're talking about stimulus money for students and parents. We're talking about financial literacy and student loan debt and or forgiveness. So get a pen and paper and sit down and listen up, or better yet, just go ahead and download this and save it for later, and we'll jump right in to cover those topics. Okay?
You did some research,
Mm-hmm.
and what did you learn?
Well, and I kind of already knew about this before because all right, let me back up. We got to do a little bit of history and background.
Okay.
So when the CARES Act was passed last year, there was money for schools, for including colleges and universities, right?
Right.
In that legislation, and that was distributed, and it was less money, and the rules were a little bit different. But the Department of Education set up something called the Higher Education Relief Fund in order to distribute that money, set up guidance and rules, et cetera, et cetera. And so when the most recent round of legislation was passed in December, it was basically wash, rinse, repeat. It was basically the same thing. However, there were some slight changes to the distribution and allocation of how those funds were intended to be basically spent, right? So
you mean the guidance on how organization the institution was to distribute, or how the feds were distributing the money?
Oh yeah, yes, you're right. So yes, on how what the institutions were supposed to do with it.
Okay.
So for public and private universities, basically the funds were split in half. So part of the funds were intended to be for, financial aid for students. And let me look at the HERF rules here real quick.
Because I think there was a change last year. If you were, let's say, Phoenix or Purdue Global, where your whole instruction was already online learning, you weren't eligible for money. But this year you are.
Right.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay.
So based on what I've learned, the way the amount, well, first of all, for an institution to get the money, they have to apply for a grant. Okay. And the funds are doled out based on the shares of Pell Grant recipients. Basically, it's a need-based issue to a certain extent.
I wondered about that. Okay.
Yes. So also, in addition to that, proprietary institutions, so for-profit universities, they can get some of the money too. However, they can only use the money for financial aid and to assist students. And so
that's reassuring. Yeah.
So they can't. The public and private institutions, like I said before, they split the funds in half. Part of it, not necessarily in half, the proportion is a little bit different. Part of it goes to student aid, and the other part goes to support the university. So, for example, if they've had to transition to online learning, they can use some of that money to pay for
that infrastructure
right
to make it happen. Okay.
Development, right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the amount that's intended to go toward financial aid and to benefit students is about the same, but the institutional support amount has gone up. So because this is a substantially higher allotment to education, higher education. And of course, there's also money in there for elementary and post-secondary education, that kind of thing. But what we're talking about right now is we're talking about just colleges and universities. And so there's a lot of information in the HERF rule, so Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. So it's shortened up to HERF, which I think is kind of,
yeah.
So there's information in there, but to the extent that there is guidance and information at all, the list of rules or frequently asked questions is just 10 pages long. There's not an extensive amount of information. And again, this happens whenever legislation is crammed through it quickly.
Really fast.
There's very little guidance. So
it's left to universities' professional discretion on how to administer.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
So, now my understanding is the student has to also apply for a grant to get access to some of those funds.
Which I find interesting because, and they may all do it the same this year, but last year, I know we had some institutions that were private, like Taylor University, I know, they divvied it up. I don't know how they divvied it up, but the student that I know didn't have to apply for anything. And maybe the fact that he did a FAFSA was his application. And then the folks at my institution at Purdue, a lot of those parents were like, what do you mean? Where's the application? How do I get it? And of course, they send the email to the student, which last spring, students were inundated with emails from everyone. So they just got overwhelmed and stopped reading everything because, they were getting 10 emails from each faculty member about transition to remote learning and what that was going to look like. So I know there was a lot of overwhelm last year. So I will be curious. I want to go back. I looked at 4 institutions and they had not yet posted their application process for this year.
I don't know because I didn't look at, so I'm looking at the HERF 2 rules, right? Or the HERF 2 frequently asked questions. I didn't look at the original HERF rules
from last year.
Right. So I'm not sure if there was a requirement for an application.
Okay.
So things did change up a little bit with this new legislation, but I think what they're trying to do, and there's, that grant money can be passed on to the student and they can use it for whatever they need to use it for. Basically, ideally it needs to be to support their distance learning or to support their tuition requirement or whatever.
And they're going to get a statement from the university to use in their tax return for next year. Yeah. So, because this will be taxable income?
I would imagine.
Like a scholarship.
I would imagine so.
Okay. Right.
I mean, that is an excellent question. Again, so, and I did see that you answered a question and tagged me on Instagram. And when I was answering that, when I was responding to that, I was thinking to myself, it is really difficult to respond to this question because this is a whole new world. There's no, and so, for example, I recently did a newsletter about the fact that the unemployment benefits that folks receive from the CARES Act, that's taxable income too. And answering these questions and talking about this, it is difficult to do in a conclusive way.
Well, it just raises 5 more questions for everyone that you try and answer.
Right. Difficult to say, oh yes, this is absolutely what you can expect, because it's hard to say.
So let's play out a scenario for my audience. They are parents, and sometimes they are going to say, I didn't have my student do the FAFSA because we are self-pay. We're not eligible for anything. Is it too late to, what would your advice be now, knowing that there are additional dollars coming down the pike? Would you say it's a wasted effort, or is it never too late to submit a FAFSA?
I would say submit the FAFSA.
Do it.
I always have trouble. That word is sometimes trips me up a little bit, especially before coffee. So I would say submit the FAFSA form and let the Department of Education or the school tell you you can't submit it.
What is your counter to the parents that will say, I don't want to disclose information about our financials if it doesn't mean we're going to get something?
That is a choice you make. You have to weigh that. That's up to you.
Okay, so in my mind, I'm telling myself, it's data coming from the IRS. They know it anyway.
Right. But again, it's just like advising somebody about whether or not to file for bankruptcy. That's something you have to make that decision
Personal
yourself.
choice.
But you are weighing the likelihood of getting additional funds against your concern that you might not want to disclose something. And if that is your concern, then you may need to contact a bankruptcy attorney or an attorney of some sort, because you may have bigger issues. So maybe a tax attorney.
Perhaps.
But I personally would go ahead and fill out the FAFSA and be prepared for that. Be prepared to.
Good advice. I would agree with that. Okay, based on Coach Christine's question that she had, there were two things that I was scratching my head on, and that my hair therapist was like, I don't get it. What am I missing? I'm like, I don't know either. I'm going to ask Joy. So one comment was the estimated family contribution is now going to be relabeled student aid index. And it can now that number can actually be a negative number. How do you see that playing towards a benefit to the student? Why would it go negative and not just bottom out at 0?
Well, so again, we're talking very theoretically here, because this is that shift is not going to occur until next year, I think, right?
Well, it'll open up in October for the 22-23 year.
For the upcoming academic year. So I think that the negative, I don't see how it wouldn't benefit the student, because if what you're saying is that expected family contribution goes less than 0, then, okay, so first of all.
Right. Yeah, it shows a demonstrated greater need.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
They're shortening the form. So they're trying to make the form simpler to fill out.
You don't have to invest an afternoon to do the FAFSA.
Right. Or I should say it more simple. So they're trying to make the form more simple to fill out. And that way you're going to need to maximize the benefit or the effect of each metric on the form. So if you're showing that you have, a negative number in your student aid index, then that's going to be a red flag to whoever, whoever's the school or whoever's reviewing the FAFSA form, that you need more aid than just, breaking even. So
it gives you a greater assessment of all the zeros. Now you can have negatives. So if you are doing a need-based distribution, you can actually see a greater need when you can go in the negatives. Okay. Now, the other question I heard was, why are they no longer going to ask how many family members are college students? Do you know that?
Wouldn't that be factored into the student aid index?
I guess until we see the form, we won't really know, will we? Because to me, that indicates if you've got 2 going to college, that's going
to be, until we see the form, it'll be easier to answer that question once we see the form.
Right.
But I think that might be there again. If they're asking for your expected family contribution, even though it's now labeled something else, that's essentially what it is. How much can your family pay? That's going to be how many people the household is supporting in their own, college education should be reflected in that number.
Should be.
It's just not going to be broken out in terms of, oh, this is why that number is a negative number, or why, whatever that number is.
Right. So one last question, and then I'll let you revert back to the things you actually planned ahead for. My student received money last year. How do I know that they got whatever statement they needed for filing taxes this year, so that we're not going to get audited or hosed because we didn't claim something last year? Do I assume that the school bundled it, or do I need to ask the school that?
Yes, ask the school.
Okay.
When it comes to this kind of stuff, when it comes to financial aid,
never assume anything.
You never assume anything, ever, because it's not that I don't trust the schools, but they have a lot on their plate. And so ultimately, because you, the borrower or the receiver of the aid, are responsible for your financial world, you are the one who needs to really be crossing your T's and dotting your I's and making sure you have all the documentation and paperwork that you need. Yeah, that's absolutely, make sure of that. That's what they're there for. They're there.
Exactly.
And the last thing, so I take it that you're claiming your student in this scenario?
Yes. Yes.
So there again, there's another.
Because they could decide you could let that go, right?
Well, why would you? You get that tax break if you can.
I know, absolutely.
I'm assuming that the school would send that information to the student.
The 1098T, right? Yes, goes to the student.
Right. So to what extent do you trust your student to pass that on, So, and everyone knows their own student.
Sure. Yeah. And by the time that rolls around, right, they're just getting back into the spring semester. They may or may not be paying attention to that like you are. So for sure,
right.
Find out where the 1098T is. Hopefully you have not already filed your taxes. If you have, certainly talk to your tax preparer about what you need to do to amend it.
Yeah, amend your tax return, right?
Yes.
So, and I think a lot of people don't realize that. They don't realize, especially, I think a lot of people don't realize what kind of implications any kind of income like that brings up with the IRS. And we used to make a joke that if the IRS, if you are walking down the street and you found $1 on the street, the IRS expected you to claim that as income on your tax return.
Yeah, that's what my dad's a tax preparer, and that's his legal advice.
And so the other part of that joke is the IRS can leave you literally standing in the street without a barrel to hide your nakedness.
So do you know then, for parents that received the stimulus check last year for their student, would they expect to see some kind of statement from the feds to declare that, or do they need to make a note of that when they're filing their taxes?
You can make a note of it, but I don't, stimulus money is not considered taxable income. That's my understanding. So I actually recently did I do a video?
That's cool. I'll have to go look at that. I created a whole playlist for my daughters from your YouTube channel of all the stuff, student loans, getting your credit up to date, getting ready to get a mortgage. I made a playlist for them from your content, which is amazing.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. So it's basically, they're treating it like an advanced credit, if I'm not mistaken. Really? And then remember, for me to even utter the word tax malpractice.
Yes, yes. You're not a tax professional.
But the stimulus payments are not includable in your gross income. And I'm reading this from a website. Therefore,
So
include
am I saying this right then to say that, so let's say I am getting $3,000 in a tax return this year. If I got $1,500 in stimulus, then my tax refund is now $1,500 because I got the advance?
No, so it will not reduce your refund or increase the amount you owe when you file your taxes. That's my understanding.
Okay. We'll see how this all plays out then.
Right. So, well, yeah. I think that, and it shouldn't be considered taxable income.
Right.
In my mind, the way I think about it is you're just getting some of your tax money back, basically.
Right.
So, yeah. So we'll see how this new round of stimulus payments, because I'm anticipating that the next round of stimulus legislation will pass by the end of the month. And get signed in. So we'll see how that shakes out. But my understanding is, and from everything I've read from the IRS website and et cetera, stimulus money is not taxable income.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear.
Yay!
I know, right. Do the universities have a deadline to distribute the money that they received that's earmarked for students?
Okay, so from my read, I do not see any deadline. And I will tell you that I went back and I read through that part of the CARES, or not the CARES, but the coronavirus relief.
The first round?
No.
This one.
The December.
Okay.
I read through it and I did not see, well, yes, I did actually. Let me take that back. I think it said the money is available until September 1st. By my read, it needs to be made available at least until September of 2021, possibly September of 2022.
Okay. I can't imagine anybody hanging on to that money that long.
Oh, no. In fact, I think some of the money was made available before 2021.
Yeah, I think so.
Passing the Department of Education, they were like, bam,
let's get it out there. Yeah. I'm going to be curious how many institutions survive because of suffering from enrollment, having to furlough faculty, and then the tuition increase. I mean, knock on wood, I'm really lucky that the institution I work at, for as long as I want to work there, I think we're fiscally really healthy. And that comes from the leadership, having a former governor. And I think he worked for Bush 1 in the budget office. But yeah, he's frozen tuition for 11 years.
11 years? You said he's been at that institution? So he's seen the institution through the tail end of the recession there. So 2008 recession.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good. It's important to have good leadership right now. So just real quick, I did find, so under Division H, Title 3, student financial assistance, it says for carrying out subpart $24 billion, which shall remain available through September 30th. The maximum Pell Grant for which a student shall be eligible during the award year 2021-2022 shall be $5,400. So, and then the next part is student aid administration, and that's also has to remain available through September 30th, 2022. Yeah, I think
now,
that's right.
I also read, which I thought was interesting, that a university cannot make a student's receipt of those funds dependent on their continued or future enrollment.
Correct. That's correct.
Wow.
That tracks with what I've read. Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. So if your student attended during fall or even started the spring, they could apply and be eligible for some of the monies and still potentially take off a semester or a year until things get back to normal, because maybe they just can't handle this remote learning.
And I think to a certain extent, this ties in a little bit to what you were saying about if there are institutions that will survive. I think you are witnessing, and this is just me, you might know more about this or have a more valid opinion about this because you're actually in that industry. But I feel like you are witnessing the beginning of some significant changes in the landscape of,
for sure,
colleges and universities. I think and part of that also is the sheer volume of federal student loans that are out there that are not being paid right now and that are not accruing interest. So
right,
all of this together is like a perfect storm of circumstances that I just can't see not having a pretty significant impact.
Absolutely. Have you seen the movement? And I can't remember now, I'll have to message it to you. I can't remember what they've called themselves, but it's this group of college grads that have formed together to say, I am not paying back my student loan, even though it's all payments are frozen. This small group that I think I saw it on a Reddit thread. They said, we're not paying it back until President Biden honors his commitment and uses executive order or whatever he has to do to wipe us clean.
It seems like I've heard about that. So
that could be detrimental to your credit, right?
Oh, yes. Yes. So that just demonstrates to me two things. The first thing is when politicians are running for office, the statements they make are, and maybe to a certain extent, this is intentional. I'm not making a political comment, but their statements are not always fleshed out and explained.
It's more idea theory. Yes.
So,
yeah,
that also demonstrates to me that these individuals don't understand how government works in terms of the House of Representatives and Congress has to approve major.
That's why there's 3 distinct branches of
student loan forgiveness.
Yes.
Representatives controls the purse. That's their primary responsibility in general. And so, which makes sense because, of the way the House of Representatives is set up. But if they did some research, just some basic research, and I actually did a video about this not too long ago. But sometimes I get my content mixed up. I can't remember if I did a video about it or if I did a blog.
I'll check on your YouTube and see if I can't find it there, and I'll link to it.
I kind of explain in that video. Well, I don't kind of explain. I explain in that piece of content. The truth is, the president cannot just, with the stroke of a pen on an executive order, do a bulk forgiveness of student loan debt.
He does not have that power.
No.
Okay.
He may have some authority to forgive a limited amount of student loans, but a bulk forgiveness, that takes an act of Congress. You can't just say.
That's what I've heard as well. Yes.
You said you're going to forgive our student loans. Now go do it. That's not the way it works. And so those, I sympathize with them, with that group. Sure. I do, because I had a massive amount of student loan debt, not as much as some people, but for me, being the poor kid that I was,
right.
For me, my student loan debt was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I got to get a job. And so I sympathize, but at the same time, I also understand. And there's a lot of people out there. I've made comments about student loans before and forgiveness and et cetera. And people have responded to me saying, it's a loan, not a gift. And yeah, I know that. And part of my philosophy is don't take out loans you can't reasonably expect to pay back, right? But at the same time, when the system becomes predatory to a certain extent because it's not explained well, or it's not.
Oh yeah.
People don't, when I went to college when I was 18 and I was signing on the dotted line,
for tens of thousands of dollars.
Well, for me, I actually got a lot of Pell Grants and assistance, but
yeah.
For me, that didn't start until law school. But still, these are young people who are signing on the dotted line for substantial loans. And I saw a comedian not too long ago who made some jokes about it. And basically his shtick was, yeah, these are small business loans. And while he's
That's
making
funny.
jokes, right? While he's making jokes, I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, he's basically right.
Yes.
These are small business loans, and you are betting that your borrower is going to be a good business person, and they're not always, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
So I do sympathize, and I really do. But at the same time,
do you think requiring before a student signs on a promissory note to have them complete? I know because my daughter had to do it, right? She had to go through some training online. But do you think it would serve the next generation better?
Yes.
To go through these learning modules, take a financial literacy assessment, and have to achieve a certain threshold before they can sign a promissory note.
Yes. And many times I have said this all over, and I don't know, in videos and content, giving talks. Many times I've said this. I don't understand why personal finance is not a mandatory part of elementary school and high school.
Why?
Curriculum.
Why? Yes.
You understand what you're signing up for. And so this brings me back to the most recent legislation. As I was reading through it, something not a lot of people are talking about, but it's in this legislation. And maybe this is something we can dig into a little bit at some point. But this legislation also has a lot of language in it talking about servicers and how they have not been communicating effectively with borrowers about their options with regard to repayment plans and things like that. And I have been yammering away about that for like 2 years now.
Yeah, you've got some old content on that for sure.
Right. Ever since I started down this path. And in fact, if you look in my Parents Guide to Better Borrowing book, you'll see my servicer handbook in the back of it. I think it's the last chapter. And so, what do you mean? I know, I wrote it. Servicers, I hope that this is the case. I hope servicers are about to get schooled on how they are. Yes, because people call their servicer looking for information, and what they're getting is forbearance. You need forbearance, and they don't understand how interest is accumulated. Right. So they need servicers who, and I get it, they're for-profit companies. They don't want their employees to spend time hand-holding, but someone has to do it. Right. Maybe it should be a class.
Yeah, do it once, create an online course for it, and then you can rinse and repeat.
Well, I have 2 webinars.
That's right. That's right. But, and you are not getting paid by them, so they are probably pretty impartial.
Well, they follow the Code of Federal Regulations. That's and the Department of Ed information, all the information that I can find. You should see my giant book of information.
So your webinar is probably cheaper than 1 month interest payment.
One webinar is $97.
Yes. For most students, that's less than an interest payment. Yeah. What a great investment.
Well,
nice little plug there that we segued into on accident even.
But the truth is, it is inexpensive, and it's inexpensive for a reason, because I want people to have this information and to be able to educate themselves and to understand how it works and what payment options are available to you, and et cetera, et cetera. It makes me just so irritated that people are out there and they're signing blindly on the dotted line, and they have no access to information that they need. So anyway.
And the time it would take you on the front end to educate yourself versus the time it takes you on the back end to recover from bad decisions, right? It's probably a much different hill.
It's not it's not just the time, it's the amount of money you're going to, the money you're going to be digging yourself out of.
The accrual. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
That is something that I think this Department of Education is going to start eliminating contracts for servicers who do not comply.
That is amazing.
With the standards set. Now, I have yet to see any standards set by the Department of Education. That's a gripe I've had for a long time too. That's just something that I wanted to.
Good.
Nobody's talking about that right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see anyone or hear anyone talking about that.
The servicers.
And so that's something that out of all of this legislation, that in terms of just financial aid and student loans, that to me is the most important little nugget. Mm-hmm. Because that's a long-term issue.
Oh yeah, at least 10 years.
When student loans come back into repayment at the end of September, it'll be interesting to see where this process is at.
So tell me this, Joy. I'm going to challenge everybody that listens to this to invest in your webinar for themselves and for their student. Is that a lifetime access? So as long as your webinar is live, that $97, they don't have to look at it now. Their student can look at it, at the end of the spring semester, over the summer, whenever they have a window of time.
Yes. So I don't have a time limit on it.
Okay.
The only time limit there might ever be is if I change platforms where the course lives.
Okay.
So, and I do plan on doing that at some point. Mm-hmm. But it's an hour and a half each so there's 2 webinars. There's one for high school students and their parents, and then there's another one for current college students and recent grads, right? And so those 2 webinars live on a separate course platform, and I'm planning on folding them into New Cash View, just my website. So, but each webinar is an hour and a half, so it's a long webinar, but my suggestion would be to sit down and power through it. And I also provide a workbook that goes along with it that has every slide and that has.
So you can make notes and go back and revisit.
Yeah, right. And then of course you also get the servicer handbook, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like it's something that if you can sit down and power through and you print out the workbook, you have that with you. So,
yeah, I think it's great advice.
Thank you.
Advice. Yes.
Well, I
mean, where were you 6 years ago?
Ooh, 6 years. I was hammering away at bankruptcy, doing bankruptcy work. So, which I still am, and there's bankruptcy stuff in this recent legislation too. I need to sit down and look through that, but I don't think it's going to substantially change anything right away, but I don't know. We'll see.
This was great. Great. Thank you so much.
All day.
I know. All right, friends. I will talk to you soon. Okay. Thanks so much, Joy. I always appreciate everything you give.
You are very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
All right, you guys, that was amazing. I could have talked with Joy all day because she is such a wealth of information, and there are so many weird scenarios. I hope you guys also found that helpful. I think in the end, the proof is going to be in the pudding, as they say, related to, is the FAFSA revision going to be better for you and your students, and how much money will your students get? Do me a favor. If your student gets some stimulus money from the college, send me a DM on Facebook or Instagram, or email me. I'm at lisa@lisabeals.com. I want to know so that I can share, or if you go on social and share, that's spreading the news to other parents and families so they know there is money already being distributed so that they can get their student paying attention to that. Okay? All right, speaking of paying attention to, have you seen the free giveaway that I have in exchange for your email? It is all the deadlines. I have a Google document that I created because I want to be able to update it and add to it easily. Right now, it's got something like 80 dates. There is a tab for new beginners in first year, and then there's a tab for continuing students. and graduating seniors, so that you can just email it to your student and say, here are the dates you need to find and calendar. Because who wants to hear their students say, yeah, that late fee is because I forgot. I didn't know what the due date was. No one wants to hear that. Go over to lisabeals.com/deadlines if you want the deadlines for yourself. You're welcome. Okay, friends, that's going to be it for this week. Don't forget to share, subscribe, and like this episode. Pass it on to friends, to sisters that you know could benefit from this information that I am pulling together for moms of college students, because it takes a village. It takes a village. All right, till next week. Take care.